everything else that nonprofits do, and that is undervaluing and underdeveloping their primary asset offering. No work? Aha. And that's their staff. So everybody here knows, because you all work with nonprofits, or are nonprofits, that we exist to serve our clients, right? We exist to make sure our services perpetuate, that we help people who need the most help. And too often that comes at the expense of the people who actually do the work. And we see this persist in every single sector of nonprofit work at every single level. But what makes me an expert to talk about something like this? Well, I wanted to share just a little bit about you, a little bit with you about me. Before I started Right on Fundraising, I worked in the nonprofit sector for 10 years. Fundraising is actually all I've ever done. And over that 10-year period, I worked for 4 different organizations. At those 4 organizations, I had 7 different bosses. I had, in about that time frame, about 15 direct reports. I worked with over 100 individual board members. I sat down and did all this math, counting them, and more than 40,000 donors. So that's a lot of people to interact with in a span of 10 years. And I raised $32 million in that 10-year span. So I think I can say with confidence that I was pretty decent at my job. I can tell you at the end of a 10-year span, by the time 2018 hit, I was ready to be one of these people. I was ready to walk away. And that's why I can speak to you from a place of experience today, not just as someone who has worked to retain and grow talented fundraisers, but also as someone who has been ready to walk away from the nonprofit sector. Excellent.
Here we go.
There we go.
All the glitches are out now.
That's perfect. It's because we're the first one of the day. It's all right. So let's talk a little bit about nonprofits' dirty little not so secret, which is employee retention. Let's start at the CEO position. Today we're going to talk a lot about fundraisers, but as everybody who works for a nonprofit knows, the CEO has a fundraising responsibility, right? At the end of the day, if you're missing your marks, if your revenue's not coming in, director of development might be on the line, but the CEO probably is too. So let's talk about CEO retention in the nonprofit space. Forbes actually just put out some updated data around this, and they found that by 2025, 45% of nonprofit CEOs will leave their current job and move on to something else. A quarter of those people who leave their job are going to leave the nonprofit space altogether. They're not coming back. They're not going to a new nonprofit gig. They're not retiring. They're done. Fundraisers is even worse. These are typically people who work in the director of development space or development manager. They're working on special events, database folks. 51% of fundraisers will leave their jobs in the next 2 years. More people, shorter turnaround. And a third of them are going to leave the sector entirely. How does this compete with general nonprofit staff? Well, in general, nonprofit staff turnover is higher than for-profit sector, just kind of generally speaking. Turnover for everybody else in the nonprofit sector usually hovers somewhere around 19%. That's a huge gap, right? Between 19%, 45%, 51%. And if you're looking at what a normal turnover rate is for the for-profit sector, it's 12%. So we're not talking about a little problem. We're not talking about something that's a little understated or connected just to the market or just to conditions. That's a huge gap to go from 12% turnover in the for-profit world to 51% turnover potentially in your director of development. That's something that merits our attention and merits some significant changes in how we go about growing and retaining our staff. Let's talk about why. Why does this exist? So there's 6 primary reasons that good fundraisers leave. And I'm talking about, when I say good fundraisers, I mean everybody who touches the fundraising sphere. The number one reason is that there's not enough help from leadership or from anyone else. Fundraising can be a really, really isolating experience. And that's because for a lot of folks, there is this assumption that, all right, yay, we did our job. We hired a fundraising person. Now we're gonna put them over there in this corner and give them some metrics and we're done. We don't have to do anything else. Typically speaking, the board doesn't really know what a professional fundraiser does. The CEO or the executive director tends to delegate to the director of development all of the fundraising planning, all of the details in the strategic planning. And the director of development and the program staff rarely actually interact. So the director's kind of out on their own guessing what they should be talking about, how they should be framing the impact, what programs actually need the most funding. So you kind of have a perfect storm of situation there. 29% of people who leave the job for this reason are dissatisfied with the support that they are receiving from leadership. 29%, that's a huge number. I can tell you that, so I first became a director of development right before I was 30, and I had been fundraising for a while before that, and I distinctly remember the moment sitting in my office looking at the screen. There was a special event that was down on revenue. I was stressing out, trying to figure out how we were going to meet our marks. And I distinctly remember the level of anxiety I was feeling looking out my door at all of the people on the team who I knew. I knew their families and the medical bills they were trying to pay off, and the tuition that they were trying to pay. Looking at a bottom line number, knowing you're going to miss it, knowing that there's not a lot else you can do about it because there's so many mitigating factors to fundraising, and that the livelihood of the people you care about is on the line if you don't make your numbers. Fundraising is frequently described as a pressure cooker, and that's why. Because that is way too much pressure to put on one person's head. There needs to be a collaborative effort there, right, to alleviate some of that stress. This is a big reason why people walk away from fundraising. It's really stressful. Number 2, unrealistic fundraising goals. Who here has experienced an unrealistic fundraising goal? Yeah. Go ahead and all raise your hands. This is also a really big reason why people walk away from nonprofit fundraising. 27% leave because of unrealistic fundraising goals. So there's some important things to take into consideration here. The first one is that there has been a major decrease in individual giving historically. Individual giving has decreased. It used to represent about 82% of all giving. Today it represents about 60% of all giving. That's a colossal seismic shift in how philanthropy happens, and it's taken place over the last 40 years. For the most part, we don't look at fundraising from a long-term standpoint. We think about it in terms of what do we have to raise this year? What do the goals say? Well, there are some trends and some things that we need to be thinking about when we're considering our goals. Another big, much more recent trend, donor retention is typically not great. At any nonprofit you go to, it's a struggle that every nonprofit deals with, figuring out how to retain their donors year over year. It used to be 45%. This past year, and thanks to the pandemic, it's dropped below 40%. That means that we are working harder than ever before to get new people into the door because the people that we're working on retaining are leaving and going on to other things. Even with conditions like that, we haven't seen budgets shrink or level off or programs stall out. We've seen our program budgets grow and grow throughout this entire time, even when we've seen the pools that we're trying to raise money from shrink and become less diverse. We've seen a concentration of wealth at certain areas, but we're fishing from the same old pond. Why is this? Well, board members drive a lot of the metrics, right, that happen at this level. There's a lot of board members who are involved in setting the budget. And most board members, and I'm not knocking on board members here, they're very important to the process. Most board members come from the for-profit sector. There's a lot of bankers, for example, on boards. A lot of people who understand what it takes to run a for-profit company, who understand the bottom line and profit, and who take some of those best practices and try to apply them to how to build a nonprofit budget. Well, a nonprofit budget is not the same as a for-profit budget. When we focus only on profit or bottom line when it comes to a nonprofit organization, we get sucked into this cycle of transactional fundraising. One of the things that I hear most frequently from donors is, every time you come to me, you're asking me for money. I feel like an ATM, right? I'm sure most of you have heard at some point this ATM analogy because it gets thrown around a lot in fundraising. The reason that fundraisers feel like they don't have the time to develop these relationships with donors and they're only going to them when it's time to ask for money is because they have metrics they have to hit that are driven by a bottom line number. They have to get out there and meet those goals, or they're probably going to get fired. And that kind of transactional relationship that's driven by the budget and driven by the people who set the budget actually hurts long-term fundraising and drives people away from your mission. Fundraisers can't stand this. 97% of people who are fundraisers, probably 100% of people who work for nonprofits, do it because they're connected to the mission. So when you take them, the further you take them away from the mission and the further you drive them towards transactional fundraising, the more their satisfaction with their job goes down. Third reason, too many bad managers. The nonprofit sector is a really unique sector. First of all, there is no straight pathway for most people to get into nonprofit fundraising. There's really not an undergraduate program that exists. Some people come from communications, from business, but there's really kind of a mixed bag. For most people, they come to fundraising after having done something else with their lives. Most people, this is a second or even a third career. So we kind of lack best practices or shared language about what it means to be a fundraising manager. Secondly, like I said, it's not usually a first job. And what that means is you have people who are frankly a lot less tolerant of being talked to like a child, or an organization not having its policies together. There's just frankly not as much tolerance for, what's the best way to say this, because we're on, thank you, shenanigans, management shenanigans. And third, this is the one that I laugh ironically because I've seen it so many times. Usually the reward for being a great fundraiser is that you're promoted into management without any thought for what that actually means. So fundraising management is the place where you do the least amount of fundraising, right? And a lot of people who are good at fundraising are good because they're happy road warriors. They like being in front of people. They enjoy kind of the rush of going after the gift. And when you take them away from that and you put them in an office and you give them management expectations, you're actually taking them away from the thing that made them so valuable to your organization to start with, and you're calling it a reward. So again, we have kind of these three factors that are swirling around that create a really toxic work environment for a lot of folks. 10% of people who walk away from nonprofits are leaving a bad manager. Reason number 4, this is another big one, lack of resources and tools, or having the wrong tools altogether. So as a sector, we're not very good at talking about overhead. It's the thing that makes a lot of CEOs, executive directors, and board presidents shake in their boots. And the reason we don't want to talk about overhead is because we've been told by donors that overhead is bad. Well, that's not true. Overhead is necessary in order to actually get our programs done. There are certain things that you have to have as infrastructure for your organization in order to function. Everything, especially if it's a tool or resource, that is not connected to a program in the nonprofit world is seen as a second-class expense, and that's a big mistake. If leadership doesn't have the courage or the language to have very honest conversations about overhead and why it's important to the organization, you can bet that your staff is not going to stand up and tell you what they really need to get their job done. And that hurts the entire process. I have a really good example of this. I at a former nonprofit I worked for, I had a grant writer on my staff. We did not have the money at the time to invest in software, database, whatever it was. We had unprioritized, deprioritized that as it was part of overhead. So my grant writer would head down once a month to the central library here in Tulsa. He would light a candle, say his prayers, do whatever he had to do before he get there to hope and pray that there was nobody on that computer, because it was just that one computer that had the database that we needed. If there was nobody on that computer, he could sit down and he could prospect for the grants that we needed to apply for, the information that we needed, the names of the foundations, the deadlines, the trustees, what we needed to submit with our grant application, all of that was on this like holy grail of a computer. Now, we couldn't email any of that information to ourselves. So he literally took an entire day and printed off a page of information for every single grant that we needed to apply to. I mean, this is one of the most inefficient ways I can think of to get to information that is literally critical to raising money. Like, you cannot go after it without knowing this information. And you might think that this is a crazy story. This is normal. There are people watching the stream now, maybe people sitting in this audience, who send people down to the central library to do this every single month, because it's because most nonprofits are not investing in the databases and the tools and resources that they need to actually get out there and raise money. And this is a huge problem. 62% of nonprofit fundraisers leave a job because they don't have access to the tools and resources they need to raise money. 62%, that's huge. 40% of nonprofit fundraisers don't feel like they have the right donor database. They're unhappy with the data, either how it's being captured or how it's being reported. Big one. All right, reason number 5, limited opportunities for advancement. 85% of fundraisers will leave a job at some point in their life because there is nowhere left for them to grow. This is particularly true of smaller organizations. 83% leave because there's a lack of succession planning. So it's not necessarily that they want to grow up, it's that they're ready to leave the organization and there's not a plan to replace them, and they get so frustrated by that fact that they end up leaving anyway. Development jobs can be really, really siloed, and typically what you see happen is if you have multiple people in a development function, more senior fundraisers get to do the fun stuff. They get to go talk to the donors, and they go to the events, and they do the networking gig, they raise the money, and the more junior people, they get relegated to the data entry and to the envelope stuffing and things like that. Not a great way to develop talented fundraisers who are there because they care about your mission and they want to raise money for it. So this separation, this hierarchy that keeps happening, whether or not it's spoken, it's part of fundraising culture. And it's a big reason why people are walking away. So 61% of nonprofit fundraisers say they have no access, no access to professional development opportunities. 34% that do have it think it's kind of crappy. Just think the quality of the professional development is not very good. Last reason the nonprofit fundraisers leave the sector, reason number 6, inadequate compensation. I don't think this is going to surprise anybody here. No one gets into nonprofit work to become rich. That is not the name of the game. However, nonprofits have a bad habit of asking folks to wear too many hats. And this is especially true in the fundraising world. It's pretty common to see a fundraiser who is not only responsible for raising all of the funds that come into the organization, but also for leading the communication strategy, for doing some board development, being part of strategic planning. My goodness, the duties go on and on. That duties as required at the bottom of the resume takes on a whole new meaning in the fundraising space. 26% of people are dissatisfied with their salaries in the nonprofit space, in the fundraising side of the nonprofit space. 20% of them are dissatisfied with their benefits. And this, again, comes back to that overhead conversation. Either, most nonprofits will say, well, we don't have the funds. Well, it's not always that they don't have the funds. Sometimes it's that they have not allocated the funds correctly, or they feel like if their overhead goes up, let's say you're at 20%. I've literally heard some nonprofits say to me, well, our overhead is only 10%, and we know that's what donors want to see, so we're not going to go anywhere beyond 10%. All right, if your overhead is only 10%, first of all, what are you doing? Is it legal? No, we wear it like a badge of honor. But what it really says is we could be investing 10 to 15% more of our funds into the people who actually get the job done, but we're not going to because we believe that it will make donors mad or sad. The conversation around overhead is changing. Savvy donors are stepping up and saying, we understand that it's important to get your people paid, to give them the tools and resources they need to invest in professional development. But a lot of nonprofit leaders are holding on. They still believe they're going to get nailed for it if they invest too much in overhead. And there's a lot of fear around that conversation. Okay, let's talk quickly about unicorns. You didn't know you signed up for the most depressing session of the day, right? That was a lot of terrible news. I just want to quick reality check. Everybody take a deep breath. I know that this is all bad stuff, but I want to qualify it. Most people do not experience all 6 of these things at one time. Some people won't even experience all 6 of these things, or they'll have them spread out over their career. I can tell you during my 10 years inside the nonprofit sector, when I was newer in my career, I dealt more with bad managers and having a lack of resources. And as I matured in my career, I had to deal more with unrealistic fundraising goals and limited advancement opportunities. I never actually felt underpaid. My first nonprofit salary, and I will say that fundraising professionals tend to be some of the more higher paid individuals in nonprofit organizations. My first job, I made $35,000. The last job I had in the nonprofit sector, I made $75,000. I felt like I was fairly compensated with the market rate for the work that I was doing. So not everybody's going to experience these at the same time. Not everybody's going to experience everything that we've just gone through. That said, things generally, even though they're not bad all at once, they have not been great when it comes to hiring and retaining talent for some time. And then we had a pandemic hit and things got a lot worse, right? So let's talk really quickly about at different points in your career, fundraising professionals may experience one of the 6 things. Everybody, however, was impacted. I don't care what level you're at, what position you're in the nonprofit field, everybody was impacted by some of these factors. The big one was compassion fatigue, or I should say is, as it's still going on, or vicarious trauma. And that means that people who help people who are on the front lines of emotional labor and providing services also experience a level of trauma themselves. And are pretty unlikely to take care of it because they're so worried about taking care of everybody else. Decreased fundraising or funding for programs. We saw foundations change their giving guidelines. We saw individuals direct their donations to other folks. Staff layoffs and furloughs, and then of course budget cutbacks. So we were already not investing enough in the things that keep and grow people, right? And then the pandemic happened and we had to cut back even further. So basically we took a problem that's been a problem for a long time and we made it a lot worse. So what do you do about all of this terrible news and all of these awful things? Well, I just want to remind you quickly who you are as a nonprofit sector, because it's a big damn deal and we don't talk about it enough. Nonprofits represent 5.6% of our GDP. That's over $1 trillion just in 2016. That does not include social enterprise. It doesn't include design thinking. It doesn't include people who have B Corp certifications. That's just people with 501c3 status, of which there are over 2 million organizations in the United States. This is a huge sector with a huge impact doing the most important work. So even though it might be hard, and even though we might have some challenges ahead of us, it is by no means time to throw in the towel. These are things that we can overcome. And especially with an entire generation, Generation Z, coming up into the workforce, who care more about mission than money. These are our people. These are like people who were design made for nonprofit work to get in there, roll up their sleeves and help us solve some of these issues. So there are a lot of things that we can do to counter the 6 reasons that people leave. I don't have a clock. Are we doing on time? We good?
You're great.
All right. So the first thing we can do to counter reason number 1, which again is isolation in fundraising, if you recall, is building a culture of philanthropy. And I hope that you have all heard the term culture of philanthropy before. What this means, if you'll recall, Fundraising is usually relegated, right? The board doesn't know what you're doing, the CEO delegates things to you, you're not talking to your program staff. Building a culture of philanthropy means that everyone on your organization staff has a role to play and understands what that role is in fundraising. It's a focus on building trust and collaboration and raising the visibility internally of fundraising. So much of what we focus on with fundraising is external. It's about the donors, it's about marketing, it's about events, all these things. But that's actually not what drives really sustainable fundraising. It's the internal visibility that we need to work on. So this means engaging program staff in the creation of your development materials. Make sure you have more intentional conversations happening between development and programs and that they are developing authentic friendships and relationships. Spend more one-on-one time with board members. Engage donors in program building. Anybody who's a program staff member just shuddered at the thought of a donor having anything to do with their programs, but it's really critical that we have a collaborative process in how we develop our programs and that more people feel engaged in how those things get done. A friend of mine took over at an arts organization that did not have a culture of philanthropy. He could see walking in that he was going to be siloed, he was going to be given a goal, and that he would not be successful. So what he did is he kind of went on a listening tour and he started hosting these little get-togethers with 3 or 4 people where they would just sit down and they'd get to know each other. They were all from all over the organization. This was an arts organization. We spent a lot of time with frontline folks who had never spoken to anybody in development before. Sure enough, one day, somebody from the ticketing office calls and says, "Hey, I just had someone call and buy up this huge block of tickets. It seems like something you might want to know about." As a director of development, he reached out to the person who cultivated them and he did a 6-figure gift. That was from someone in the box office, just understanding what to look for and trusting and knowing the people on their development staff enough to reach out and say, "Hey, person I know and like and trust and want to do more business with, I think this might be something that you can work with." That's huge. That takes so much of the pressure off of the person in the fundraising role to distribute power and authority across the organization and empower people to understand what true fundraising really looks like. Reason number 2 was that unrealistic fundraising goal. So how do you accomplish this? You set a realistic fundraising goal. That one's pretty simple, right? We'll move on. No. To set a realistic fundraising goal, you need to understand the market that you're fundraising in. The folks who are setting the budget need to understand the state of the market, and that's a macro and a micro market. So we need to understand what the bigger picture trends are, some of the things that we talked about earlier about a general decrease in individual giving. But you also need to understand what's happening in your local economy that is going to impact your fundraising. And quick plug, if you are strategic planning right now, we have a masterclass coming up next Wednesday where we are just going to focus on fundraising planning for 2022, and the market is all we're going to talk about, both macro and micro. So I invite you to join us. Don't move the goalposts. Don't move the goalposts. I once had a boss tell me we were doing really well in a campaign, and I think we were something like 25–30% past our goal. I was still a month away from the campaign ending, and he said, "You know what? We're just going to take that goal and we're just going to increase it by $300,000. I thought my entire volunteer workforce was going to walk away. You cannot arbitrarily change a goal or any of these things without shooting morale across the board. And the reason is fundraising isn't about, again, the profit. It's not about the number at the end of that. It's about authentically raising funds for the programs. And if you can't justify a fundraising increase by directly tying it back to a program, no volunteer or donor is going to get behind it. So I'm looking at goalposts. Consider your donor pool and portfolio of activities. So this is also really important. One of the things that I see nonprofits do a lot that we help them with it right on fundraising is they develop the budget inside the development department. That's the worst place to develop a budget because, as we have talked now at length, the development department usually knows the least about what's really happening in your programs department. Your budget should be developed inside your programs department. You should be starting with the mission that you're actually going to be executing and delivering, figuring out how much that's going to cost, and then taking that back to your development team. And it doesn't stop there. And then the development team says whether or not you have the donor base to support what you want to raise this year. If you don't, then there's a negotiation that needs to happen at a team level. If you do, then you've created a sustainable budget and you're doing a good job. Pat yourself on the back. But this is how more collaboration, more conversation, more being realistic, frankly, in setting those goals. In order to combat this idea of bad management, we need better training and promotion paths. As I shared earlier, it's not a reward across the board to just promote somebody into management who never wanted to be in management, doesn't know what it means to be in management, and would really rather be on the front lines fundraising. Understand when it's the right time to promote someone in their career and who already has the skill set. If they don't have the skill set, be prepared to invest in professional development to help get them up to speed, or you're probably going to see some people walk. If you cannot budget professional development, or if you can't do it, I got to tell you, we have amazing local networks that you can tap into for this. We're very fortunate in Oklahoma, and especially the Tulsa area. We have the Oklahoma Center for Nonprofits, which does a lot of training. We have AFP, which is Association of Fundraising Professionals, that has a luncheon every single month. It's $25. It's free professional development. GPA, Grant Professionals Association, the Chamber of Commerce has all kinds of stuff. And of course, you are sitting in 36 Degrees North, where there is a ton of professional development training that happens. There is a great deal of low cost, no cost training opportunities available, and I highly recommend sitting down with fundraising professionals, determining where they want to grow, and investing in those opportunities. Lastly, if you work for an organization that will not budget for professional development, invest in yourself. This is, as I shared earlier, this is a huge reason why people walk away from the nonprofit sector. If there's something you feel like you want to get better at and your organization isn't there with you yet, invest in yourself. Best thing you can do. There we go. Number 4, invest in what pays off. So this specifically gets to setting unrealistic goals. No, it doesn't. This is something else. There are 6 of them. Sometimes I forget what they are. No, invest in what pays off. So this is specifically about, well, we're getting back to this overhead conversation. Oh, this is tools and resources. So the overhead conversation, as I talked about earlier, I'm not gonna, beat a dead horse here, but it's essential. Again, 62% of people, it was over 60% of people walk away from the nonprofit sector at some point because they didn't have the right tools and resources to do the job. So the question is, how do you know what to invest in? How do you know what pays off? Well, you need to consider the ROI of certain activities. One of the most controversial decisions that I ever made at a nonprofit was to come in, brand spanking new, look at a budget for a special event, see that it had a 60% expense ratio, and that was before anybody took into account all of the staff time that went into pulling this thing off. When you looked at the true cost of doing business and the ROI on that one activity, that was beloved. People loved this thing. We lost somewhere in the realm of $100,000 every year putting this thing on, and it raised $500,000. So it looked like it was not a success. It was a money pit. And so I came in and I axed it, and people were so upset because that's not something that typically happens within the nonprofit space. But thinking about what invests, look, if what you're really doing at the end of the day and holding a special event in particular, if you raise $300,000, but it costs you $250 to put the thing on, once you calculate your staff time in, which you should definitely calculate in, then what you really raised was $50,000. Is there a more effective way to raise $50,000? Yes, there is, always. One of the things we talk about a lot at Right On Fundraising, so we do a lot of grant writing, but we build annual funds. So we build individual giving programs. Most people, when they think about how you get money from individuals, they think of a special event. There's like 50 different things that you could be doing to get money from individuals. And sometimes A special event is the right option, but not every time. And it's the go-to move for most nonprofits. So I would challenge that thinking. Invest in what pays off. Lean on your data. This was a big talking point of fundraising professionals. They really don't like the systems, right? They don't have enough tools here. In order to make good decisions about what's really paying off for your organization, you have to have good data. This should be the top of everybody's list. You should have a CRM that you're in love with. Speak up for what you need as a professional. So some of the most typical things that we see that are missing is a good CRM, a good project management tool, and prospecting database subscriptions. These tend to fall at the bottom of priorities and are actually the tools that are most critical to helping fundraisers do their jobs. Share the power. We talked a little bit about this one. Balancing the duties a little bit better between the new folks and the seasoned folks and providing mentoring opportunities. One of my pet peeves throughout my whole career has been a sense of entitlement. Nobody in a nonprofit organization should have a sense of entitlement. I don't care what your title is. Anybody can lick an envelope when there's invitations to go out. Anybody can do data entry. It doesn't really matter what your position is or how long you've been somewhere. In a nonprofit space, it's all hands on deck. And there should be a lot less entitlement built into the hierarchy and our structure of how we function. So fight the monotony with interesting projects. Try and share more of the responsibilities. Always promote from within when you can, and work on creating that internal pipeline. I actually just spoke to someone yesterday, so I get a lot of calls from professional fundraisers who are dealing with one of these 6 things. They think that they might be ready to move on, and they want to know, should they move on? What do they move on to? Do they leave the sector? Do they stay in the sector? Yesterday, I was chatting with someone who is the vice president of a huge NPR affiliate, and she has this enormous staff and this enormous budget that she's been managing for some time. And I asked her how big her staff was. She had a staff of about 15 people. And I asked her what her turnover was, because I knew I had this speech today. And I was like, hey, I can ask you some really good questions and get some data. The majority of people on her team last 3.5 years. That's unheard of in the nonprofit space for development. To have a team of 15 people who are all making it well past the average of 16 to 18 months into the 3-year range. I said, what are you doing? She has a power share. There are a bunch of people on her team that have the exact same job description. They have squashed the hierarchy, redistributed the workload. And what that has done, it's given people who would have otherwise been relegated to data entry or something else, an opportunity to grow and to try new things. And it's kept in check the egos that are frequently associated with fundraising. It's a shame that she's ready to move on, right? Like that's the underlying thing here. She called to talk about what her next move would be. But she's done a really good job of implementing that power share across her organization. How do you combat low pay? This one's tough. You got to pay market rate. You have to. That is so hard for so many nonprofits to hear. I can't tell you how many conversations I have with executive directors who say, well, I pay myself $45,000 and I don't understand why my staff, who's coming up on my salary wants a raise. You have to start by paying yourself a market rate. And then you have to be prepared to pay your staff market rate as well. People are graduating with student loans that outpace nonprofit salaries. This didn't used to be the case. It used to be the case where you could graduate, you were going to have some debt, but it wasn't wildly more than you could afford on a nonprofit salary. It is now. The cost of education has skyrocketed. We all know this. And a lot of people who are coming, especially Generation Z, who are specifically interested in mission over money, they are perfect fits for the nonprofit sector in so many ways, but we have to be able to adequately compensate them. There are a lot of things that we can do to offset it. So if you're unable to pay market rate, one of the things the pandemic has shown us is that remote work is awesome. So working remotely, beefing up your benefits, offering flexibility. I was going to ask permission, but I didn't. So I don't know if this person is watching right now. but I have an employee, and she's incredible. She does such an amazing job. She could care less about climbing a corporate ladder. She is Generation Z, and what she wants is flexibility. It's the thing that she cares about more in the world. And we pay competitively, but we recruit from the nonprofit sector, so our salaries look a lot like nonprofit salaries do. What she wants at the end of the day is to be able to work out of her RV and travel the country with her husband and their animals and own her own time and go rock climbing and live her best life. She knows exactly what she wants. What she doesn't know is where she wants to be in 10 years or what her next job is going to be, but that's not important right now. What's important is that she knows exactly what makes her happy, and it's not a huge bloated salary and a desk that she's going to have to sit out all day. It's freedom to make those choices. And we're seeing more and more of that, especially because of the pandemic. I know you've all been reading about the Great Resignation. People have taken stock in what really matters. And it's aligning with a lot of the things that Generation Z was already telling us about what they want to see in a job in a workplace. So if you can't pay market rate, the good news is that there are a lot of things that people care about that you can bring to the table as a nonprofit to make out a really fantastic compensation package. So a couple of recommendations to end on today. Some of the things that I would recommend that you do to keep your staff and grow your talent are initiate stay conversations. How many folks here have done a stay conversation before? Awesome. So a stay conversation is basically what you do when you want someone to stay. It's very similar to an exit interview, but rather than waiting until the person's already made the decision to leave the organization, you have it way in advance and you really have a lot of the same conversations. So what resources do you need? Are you happy in your job? Where do you see yourself 3 to 5 years from now? What do you need to get there? Having very direct conversations with folks about what they need from the organization to be productive and happy, and about what you can potentially provide to meet them what they need. Special considerations for millennials and Gen Z. I've talked about this a little bit today, but honestly, millennials and Gen Z, we're already walking in before the pandemic with just a lower tolerance for some of the things that we see, and really thinking about what they need from a nonprofit organization and how that looks different from other generations. And how them being basically the future of our workforce, how we can start accommodating that now. A full embrace of remote fundraising. So when I started right on fundraising, people thought I was a little nuts for creating a remote fundraising company, because the assumption was to be an effective fundraiser, you needed to be sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day, waiting on the phone to ring, diligently checking your emails. And I can't tell you how crazy that drove me in the nonprofit sector. Fundraisers are their least effective when they're sitting behind a desk. And most fundraisers are expected to sit at a desk, or before the pandemic, I should say, to sit at a desk for 8 hours a day and to be available in the evening to do donor events and to be available on the weekends to go out and do special events. So it ends up being way more than a 40-hour work week, and for no good reason other than the status quo. So I would definitely recommend a full embrace of remote fundraising, because you will actually have a fundraiser who spends their time more wisely and effectively, and who is a lot happier. Don't put off performance reviews. Performance reviews are really super important across the board, but especially for fundraisers. We need to be having, because turnover is so high in the fundraising profession, we need to be having more frequent, more frank conversations about, are we hitting the goals? Are we not hitting the goals? What do we need? What tools and resources do we need? Or mentoring or professional development do we need to get there? Most board members and a lot of leaders don't truly understand the fundraising cycle. We plan budgets on a 12-month scale. Fundraising does not happen over a nice clean cut period of 12 months. The big gift that you're working on can take 3 years to develop. And you're not going to have it nice and neat packaged in an annual budget every single year. So having performance reviews that reflect what the fundraising cycle truly looks like, and not necessarily what your budgeting cycle looks like, is important. And finally, stay true to your mission and values. The pandemic shifted a lot of nonprofit organizations. Some people had to really significantly change how they do business or how they serve their clients. And as I said earlier, 97% of fundraisers get into this because they care about the mission and they want to impact it. So it's important right now to be having conversations with people that are very direct. Look, this is how our mission has changed. This is how our strategy has changed. I know when you came on, this is what we were doing. Do you feel like you can move forward with the organization with this new strategy? Don't pretend that you're doing the same old thing if you're not doing the same old thing, because it's a good way for people to leave the organization. Okay. I feel like this was really heavy talk today because this is heavy stuff. But I just want to say that we are in a very unique time with the pandemic. The pandemic has been so, it has created so many new barriers for the nonprofit sector, especially around compassion, fatigue, and taking care of other people. It's also presented us with a really unique challenge because not just in nonprofits, but everywhere, we are not going back to business as usual. Things will change from here on going forward. We have an opportunity right now to take something that has historically been a huge problem in the nonprofit sector and completely change how we approach it and how we hire, retain, and grow talented nonprofit staff. It's an awesome opportunity, and I know that everyone here is up for the challenge. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Do we want to do questions? I'm not sure. Are there any questions? Did I just bum everybody out a lot?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have any resources for employers that show maybe like national or local benchmarks for good salaries and good benefits?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Oklahoma Center for Nonprofits annually puts out a compensation report, and it's affiliated with a national organization that does it every year. So if you get those emails from the Center for Nonprofits and they ask you to fill it out, do it, because it means that you get the report for free if you fill it out. Otherwise, if you don't fill out the report, you actually have to pay for it. It's not crazy expensive, but I think it might be $100, $150 or something like that. It's a very robust report. And so it gives the information not only at a local level, but it also shows how your local market compares to national markets.
Cool.
You can probably call them and get that, because I think it's already done for this past year. Go ahead.
Maybe CRM.
Ooh.
For,
Ooh.
Blackball, Flourish.
Yeah. So I think nostalgia drives me to Blackbaud because I just have used it for so long. But a lot of our clients, and we work with a lot of smaller, medium-sized nonprofits, really like Little Green Light. I've heard good things about it. So Blackbaud is a workhorse, right? Has great reporting. Oh, great. Yes, TechSoup guys, past backwards. Perfect. Blackbaud is a workhorse that has great reporting, but it's not very user-friendly, and it never has been. And we've all been complaining about it for a really long time. So I would say for big organizations, something the Blackbaud family is, but TechSoup might have some better recommendations. And for smaller organizations, especially for newer organizations, I think Little Green Light's a pretty good starting point.
Just follow, kind of have like nonprofit prospects for you that just lost their development.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I put it up here because I had so many stats we were going to today, but I think one of the most heartbreaking things that I read as I was preparing for this, because I wanted to have the most recent stats, is that as we sit here today, 1/3 of nonprofits in the US are on the brink of closing. That's a lot of nonprofits. There are 2 million out there. Any other questions?
Yeah, I guess, you put this presentation together. Like, what have you seen in them as far as when you're speaking with nonprofits and their leadership specifically? Are they starting to see things the way that you see things? Or are they just panicking, going, everything's going wrong, we don't know why? We've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas.
It's a really good question. So the question was, are nonprofit leaders also jumping onto this, or are they kind of doing the same old thing? I'm going to be honest, one of the things that we talk about the most with nonprofit leadership, and when I say nonprofit leadership right now, I'm talking about the board of directors, in general, most boards are terrified of fundraising. And it's because they don't come from a nonprofit space. Most board members, when I say most, like 99% of board members are coming from the for-profit sector. They don't have to think about fundraising. They think in terms on a daily basis very differently. We're asking them to show up once a month, maybe, to a board meeting for an hour and think in these really high-level strategic terms about something that where a space in which their brain does not occupy for the rest of the month. And then on top of that, we're saying, by the way, you sign up to be on the board, so you're gonna fundraise? There's no context there. We have no tools. We talk a lot here about how fundraisers are not set up for success. Board members are also not set up to be successful in the fundraising sphere or to have those conversations. One of the things we talk about is not only providing board members the tools that they need to have better conversations about fundraising, but addressing those fears head on. So the answer to your question is no. I don't see a ton of leaders changing how they're thinking about this, but not because they don't care or because they don't have access to this information, because they too don't have the right tools and resources and information they need to effectively do that job. They're very capable of doing it. They just don't, we're just not giving them the stuff they need to effectively lead. Good question. Yeah.
Follow up to that, recommendations or thoughts on board resources or seminars or professional development.
Yeah.
Roman, Marvel's been around
Yeah.
forever, ICF,
Yep.
others.
Instrument is excellent. Also, BoardSource is a really great tool. They're an umbrella for consultants. So I'm going to put on my right on fundraising lens here. So one of the things that we fundraise through is philanthropic equity. We care a lot about what equity looks like. We talk in fundraising about the difference between downstream fundraising methodologies and upstream fundraising methodologies. And I don't know if I have enough time, but I'm going to tell this really quick story. So the difference between the two, let's say that you've got these two women, they're going to go out and they're going to have lunch together, they're going to have a picnic, they go sit out next to a stream, they're eating lunch together. One of the women looks over and she sees a baby floating down in the stream. She jumps up, she rushes into the stream, she grabs the baby, her friend's behind her, her friend sees another baby float down the stream, she grabs that one. They turn around and they see all these babies headed toward them. So they like manically start pulling kids out of the water and throwing them up on the bank. Other people at the park see this happening. They run into the stream, they start doing the same thing. Full of people. Stream is now full of people pulling babies out. Original woman looks up. She sees her friend stand up in the water. Her friend gets up. She walks to the shore. She leaves the stream. Friend says, "What are you doing? Where are you going?" She says, "I'm going up the stream to see who's throwing all these damn babies in the river." When it comes to fundraising, we rarely look at root causes, and then full circling this back to your board question. We talk about it in healthcare, we talk about it in other industries. We rarely look at fundraising through a lens of upstream and downstream methodologies. When it comes to how most people do board development, they're doing it an old school way. They're doing it in a very responsive way. It's a downstream methodology where we are responding to pulling babies out of the river. One of the things that I would tell you is if you're wanting your board to think in a new way, that you need to find training resources that are also focused on upstream fundraising methodology. It's one of the things that we right on fundraising focus on a lot, so we do that as well. That is not to knock the people who do things best practice old school ways. That's obviously still the world that we live in, and there's a lot of value in that as well. But if you want new ideas, go to new consultants. Any other questions? Awesome. Thank you all so much for your time today.